made people even more resentful of British rule.
Yeah.
The war also drained Britain's resources,
Yeah.
which weakened their hold on their colonies. By the time the war ended in 1945, the demand for full independence was unstoppable.
So what were the key events that led to the end of British rule?
In 1946, a Labour government came to power in Britain.
Yeah.
They were more open to the idea of Indian independence.
Okay.
The new Prime Minister, Clement Attlee,
Yeah.
sent a cabinet mission to India
Okay.
to negotiate the terms of independence.
So India was finally on the verge of freedom.
Okay.
What were the main issues in these negotiations?
The biggest challenge was figuring out what to do about the demands for a separate Muslim state,
Okay.
which had grown stronger under the leadership of the Muslim League.
Right.
The Congress, led by Nehru and Gandhi, wanted a united India.
Okay.
But the Muslim League, led by Jinnah,
Right.
was determined to create Pakistan.
So two very different visions for India's future.
Yeah.
How did the negotiations go?
The cabinet mission suggested a loose federation
Okay.
with a lot of autonomy for the provinces.
Okay.
But this plan didn't satisfy either side.
Really?
The Muslim League rejected it completely.
Oh.
And the Congress, while initially accepting it,
Okay.
later backed out because of disagreements about how to interpret the plan.
So a deadlock.
Yeah.
How did India finally get independence?
The failure of the cabinet mission plan led to more communal violence,
Okay.
especially in Punjab and Bengal.
Right.
The British government, facing this crisis,
Yeah.
decided to speed up the process of transferring power,
Okay.
even if it meant dividing the country.
So a sad but maybe unavoidable outcome.
Yeah.
How did this partition plan work?
In June 1947, Lord Mountbatten,
Okay.
the last viceroy of India,
Right.
announced the partition plan.
Okay.
Both Congress and the Muslim League accepted it,
Okay.
though reluctantly.
Right.
The British Parliament quickly passed the Indian Independence Act of 1947,
Okay.
which paved the way for the creation of two independent dominions.
India and Pakistan. A huge moment, but also a painful one for so many people affected by the partition. What were the key parts of this act that shaped the birth of independent India?
The act officially ended British rule in India, granting independence to both India and Pakistan as separate dominions.
So two new countries were born.
Yes.
What else?
It also gave both dominions the right to leave the British Commonwealth.
So real independence, not just a change in who was in charge.
Exactly.
What about setting up governments in these new countries?
The act gave the existing constituent assemblies of India and Pakistan the power to create their own constitutions.
Okay.
Until then, they would govern themselves according to the Government of India Act of 1935.
Okay.
But they could make changes if needed.
Right.
The act also said that all powers previously held by the British Crown and Parliament would now belong to the Dominion governments.
So a clean break from British authority
Yes.
and a mandate for these new nations to shape their own futures.
Exactly.
What about the princely states? What happened to them?
The act declared the end of British paramountcy over them.
Meaning?
The British would no longer be responsible for protecting or governing them.
Okay.
The states could choose to join India or Pakistan,
Okay.
or stay independent.
A historic moment, giving them the freedom to decide their own fate.
It was.
But this must have caused a lot of uncertainty and potential conflict.
It did. Integrating the princely states into India was complicated.
Right.
But that's a story for another time.
Okay, we'll save that for another deep dive.
Yes.
But for now, it's important to understand that the Indian Independence Act, despite its flaws
Yeah.
and the tragedy of partition,
Right.
marked the end of centuries of British rule
It did.
and set the stage for modern India.
Absolutely.
Welcome back, everyone. It's incredible to think we've journeyed through centuries of Indian history to reach this point, India's independence.
It's been a roller coaster ride, hasn't it?
From a trading company gaining power in unexpected ways, to a massive rebellion, from reforms to a complicated partition.
And yet the story's not over yet.
Right, we've arrived at a pivotal moment. A new nation is born, and its founding document, the Constitution of India, is created.
Exactly. It's as if we've seen all the ingredients being assembled, the recipe being tweaked and adjusted, and now...
It's time to bake the cake.
Precisely. So how did India actually go about creating its constitution?
Right, a pretty important step. So
Well-
how did they do it?
Well, it actually started before independence.
Oh, really?
Remember the Constituent Assembly we mentioned earlier?
Yeah.
They were elected in 1946
Okay.
and given the huge task of drafting a constitution for a free India.
Wow, so a group of elected people creating this vital document. Who were some of the key figures in this assembly?
You had some of the most influential names in Indian history. Jawaharlal Nehru, Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, Dr. Rajendra Prasad, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, to name a few.
Wow, that's quite a lineup. This has been a challenge to get all those brilliant minds to agree on a single document.
You can say that again. The debates were intense, discussions were passionate, and compromises had to be made.
Right, I can only imagine.
They spent nearly 3 years deliberating, debating, and drafting.
3 years. That shows how committed they were and how complex this task was. What were some of the biggest hurdles they faced?
Well, imagine this. You're trying to create a blueprint for a nation that's just come out of centuries of colonial rule, a nation divided by religion and social issues, a nation with so much diversity and so many different hopes and dreams.
Yeah, that's a huge responsibility.
Yeah.
What were some of the core principles they wanted to put into the Constitution?
They wanted a democratic republic, a nation where the people had the power.
Makes sense.
They wanted to ensure justice, equality, and freedom for every citizen. They wanted a system that was strong, but also flexible, capable of adapting to a growing nation.
Those are some big goals, especially given the challenges they were facing.
Yeah.
How did they turn those ideas into actual articles and amendments?
They took inspiration from various sources, constitutions of other countries, the experiences of other democracies, and most importantly, the unique history and social context of India.
So a blend of global best practices and local knowledge. What makes India's constitution stand out?
Well, for one thing, it's the longest written constitution in the world.
Really?
It's a reflection of how complex it is to govern a nation as diverse and vast as India. It's also a living document.
Meaning it can be changed.
Exactly. It can be amended to keep up with the changing needs of society.
Okay, so it's comprehensive and adaptable. What else makes it special?
It guarantees fundamental rights to all citizens regardless of their religion, caste, gender, or social status. It establishes an independent judiciary to uphold the rule of law. And it creates a federal system that balances power between the central government and the states.
It sounds like they really put a lot of thought into creating a system that's fair, just, and responsive to the people. So after 3 years of hard work, they finally finished the Constitution. What happened then?
The Constitution of India was officially adopted on November 26, 1949, and it came into effect on January 26, 1950.
A historic day.
It was. This marked the end of India's long struggle for self-rule and the start of a new chapter as a sovereign democratic republic.
It's amazing to think that everything we've talked about, all those historical events, led to the creation of this document that's still so important to India today.
It really is. The Constitution of India is a result of its history. It reflects the struggles and sacrifices of so many people who fought for freedom and justice. And it reminds us that democracy is an ongoing process, a journey that needs constant attention and participation.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the history behind India's Constitution,
Yeah.
what are some key takeaways for our listeners, especially those studying for the UPSC exam?
First, you need to understand how British rule evolved in India, from the East India Company to the British Raj. Pay close attention to the major acts that shaped this process and their impact on Indian society. Then grasp the concept of association and how it led to Indians slowly being included in the administration. Remember its complexities, limitations, and how it influenced the development of self-governing institutions. And finally, understand the significance of the Government of India Act of 1935, especially its provisions for provincial autonomy and the division of powers which formed the basis for independent India's federal structure.
Those are some great points. It's not just about memorizing dates and names. It's about understanding the context, the motivations, the struggles, and the compromises that define this critical period in India's past.
Exactly. And for all our listeners, whether you're preparing for exams or just curious about India's political journey, remember this. The Constitution isn't some boring document sitting in a library. It's a living, breathing testament to the dreams of a nation, a guide for building a society that's just and fair.
Well said. To everyone who joined us on this deep dive, thank you for listening. We hope you've gained a deeper understanding of the historical backdrop of India's Constitution and why it still matters today. Until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep diving deep. So